Okay, this is video part 2 for this week's course on looking at census records. And what we've done here is set up Scotland's People, Ancestry and Find My Past, which are the main places I would suggest you look for records of your ancestors in the census in Scotland. Now, one of the questions which was asked on the survey this week was, do you have any ancestor you'd like me to have a look for in the census? And it will use that as an opportunity to explore and investigate how you use the various sites. Now, I haven't taken note of any names of people who've asked for these, but someone has asked me to find George Sutherland, who was born in Fern in Ross and Cromarty in 1811. Now, my suggestion there is when you've got a birth date of someone, the best thing to do is to look for them in the earliest census. So if someone's born in 1811, we're on Scotland's People at the moment, and I would imagine that all of you who've not tried this ought to get yourself an account on this as soon as possible if your ancestors are in Scotland. It costs you nothing to register with the service, but beyond that then you do have to purchase records to use on Scotland's People, and we will also post during the week a guide to using this service, because it really is the most important point of access to information for all Scottish records. We should be extremely proud of this, and I mentioned this last week, that this service exists in Scotland. And if you look down the left-hand side here, you can see there are a whole series of census records. Now, because this particular ancestor was born in 1811, I'm going to suggest we start with the 1841 census. So when I click on that, you can see I'm now searching the 1841 census, and the person I'm looking for is George Sutherland. Now, at the moment, I'm just going to leave all of the default options as they are, because we will talk about those at some point over the course of the next few weeks as well, to help you to take this further. And George, born in 1811, is going to be somewhere around the age of 30 by the time of the 1841 census. And I always allow a little bit of leeway in that, because sometimes the date of the census doesn't coincide exactly with the date that someone was born. The censuses often were taken sort of between April and June. So if someone was born in October of 1811, he would be 29. And then, of course, in this particular case, I'm going to change that again. In this particular case, because we're talking about the 1841 census, we know the ages were rounded down to the nearest 5. So although George may well be 29, he could actually be listed on the census up to the age down as far as 25. I'm also going to choose the county, and I'm going to do that by just going down here. I'm not going to choose a district, but I could do. I'm just going to leave it at Ross and Cromarty. And if I now do the search, wow, I've only got one match. Now that is quite unusual, and I don't think we'll find that for many of the other censuses that we're undertaking. But if I look at that, it's costing me 1 credit to look at. And here we have a George Sutherland listed at the age of 25 in Fern, which is where our student suggested he was born. If I want to look at that, I click here now, and that's going to cost me a further 5 credits. Now, I've actually got quite a lot of credits, as you can see there, because Scotland's People are very generous to me when we're doing this course and other courses that I'm teaching over the next few weeks at the university, and I have a chance to explore the records without it costing me personally any money in order to demonstrate its effectiveness to you. Now, my particular version of Scotland's People, the way I set it up is to download the image. Now, when you first set it up, there are lots of options where the image will automatically appear, or a variety of different methods. I've chosen this one because I tend to use a lot of different computers, including PCs and Macs and iPads and all sorts of things. And for me, the download version works best. But again, you can find out all sorts of things on the help site about that. You can see there. So if we click here, this is now going to open on my computer the actual image of the 1841 census for George Sutherland. Now it's quite difficult to read, as you can see. We know he's aged 25, so sometimes that gives me a little bit of a clue. And I can look down here, and in fact, yes, there's George Sutherland, who's aged 25. It would appear that he's a fisherman, born in the county, and he's married to Lily, who's aged 25. Well, we assume that he might be, of course, could be his sister, because in the 1841 census there's no indication of the relationships between people. And also living here is Catherine, 15, Isabella, 4, and Sophia, who's aged 1. Now, I'm not sure if this is at all the correct record for the student who's asked me to look at this, but here we have a record of a George Sutherland, aged 25. I'm just going to close that just now. We know that he's in Fern. He's in an address, it looks like Hilltown. And there are obviously 5 people living there. You'll notice that the neighbour is also a Sutherland, aged 20. And it looks to me as though Donald is married to Anna, because there's just both of them living there. And perhaps, of course, there is a family connection between Donald and George. And there may well be other Sutherland people listed with the same surname in the area, and that's quite normal to see that on a census record. So there is George and Lily, and that's on Scotland's People. I'm just going to go to one further source, and that's Find My Past. Now, I mentioned to you, you can't actually find the census records as such, the images, but you can find the transcripts on Find My Past. So if I type in George Sutherland, a birth year of 1811, and we're looking in Britain because there are other sources of records on Find My Past, if you've never seen this before, and I'll just click search here. And what we're going to have a look at here is see if there's any record of George in the 1851 census. So there's a whole lot of records for George, some of which may not be in any way connected with the one that we're looking for. But in the 1851 census, there would appear to be 24 records which could include our George. And if we look down here on Find My Past, you can see there from a variety of places, because we haven't gone in and said that we're only looking at Ross and Cromarty. Now, I did try this earlier, as you can see, and on Find My Past, if you have looked at a record earlier, you'll see a little star beside it. And if I click on View here, I'm going to get a transcript only of the people who were here. Now, isn't this interesting? Because we had looked for, on Scotland's People, there was a potential that there was someone named Lily who was the same age as George, and there doesn't appear to be a Lily in this record in 1851. We still have a fisherman in Fern, and I would suggest it probably is the same person. He's now listed as age 38. Remember, that doesn't mean that he's aged 13 years. But the 1841 census suppressed some of the years listed for him. Potentially Sophia is his wife here. Well, she is his wife now. Was she his wife maybe wrongly listed as Lily? Who knows? And again, we've got 5 children listed here, 4 of whom have been born since the previous census. Of course, this is no way indicating that the 2 family records that we've just looked at are pertaining to the same family, but obviously that would be something for you to go and investigate further. So let's look for another one, and this time we'll maybe look at Ancestry to let you see the difference, and we'll go between each of these. And somebody else has asked me to find an Andrew McKnight. Now, there is a middle name being given in the request to me as well, but I often find if you type in the middle name, you won't find that listed in the census, as I mentioned in the first video. And that's often because people were just recorded by the names that they were known as. And the estimated birth year we have for Andrew is 1895. And for the moment, I'm going to restrict my version of Ancestry allows me to look outside the UK. But let's just make it simple for now, and I'll click search here. And you can see this is set up, and my page is maybe set up slightly differently from yours. But if I look at the 1901 census, which is probably the one I'd want to look at for Andrew, considering he was born in 1895, if I click on that, that's going to restrict it to the, you can see there's rather a large number of records, and if we look down you can see the name Andrew begins to disappear a bit, and Ancestry orders the records in the potential order of relevance to the search that you've undertaken. Now, since I was given a middle name of Andrew Graham and a place of Stranraer, it would look to me that this is the most likely record of Andrew Graham McKnight, listed as Andrew G. McKnight. And when I click on this, you'll see, similarly to Find My Past, I don't get a copy of the actual image of the census record. Instead, I see a transcript of the household. And here they are here. Andrew, and again, the person who asked me to look for this said his father was John, possibly. It looks like there is a John McKnight, who's his father, and Eliza, presumably his mother, and it looks like Andrew also has a connection here, Matthew. I suspect that may well be John's brother. Now, if you see this on Ancestry, then you can click on the name above, and it will then tell you about John. So here we have John McKnight, who's aged 30, born about 1871, born in Wigtonshire, living in Stranraer, and he's a lorryman. So whether that's your ancestor or not, whoever asked me to look for it, it potentially could be. One of the things that Ancestry offers is it tries to look at the names in its database and see if there's any other connections to other records. So if you look on the right hand side here, it says, oh, I have a John McKnight in 1881. Is this relevant? And if I click on this one, let's, before we do that, take a note of the fact that John is aged 30, so we're going to find John aged about 10. Born in Stonykirk. Now this potentially is our John, or your John, because here he is, he's aged 10 in 1871, born in Stonykirk, and this is giving us a transcript of the family of John, with his parents William and Anne McKnight, and obviously a number of siblings there as well. And again, whether that's the correct record or not, I would suggest you still want to do quite a bit of checking. But that's how you can look at the census records in Ancestry. Let's look for another one, and we'll go back to Scotland's people for this. And this is a William John Davis, who was born in Glasgow in 1891 on the 4th of June. Now the 4th of June is after the census was taken in 1891, so perhaps we ought to look for him in the 1901 census. Now the first thing you'll see is that when you do that, it will come up with the last name you had searched for, which was George Sutherland. Now similarly, I'm not going to put a middle name in at this point. I'm just going to look for a William Davis, and he would be aged, since he was born in 1891, he's going to be something around 9 to 10, perhaps maybe even 8 to 10 I would type in there. I'm not going to type in a place of birth. We know that he was born in Glasgow, a place of residence. Let's go and do the search. And we don't have any William Davises. Oh, sorry, I haven't changed that from Ross and Cromarty. That explains it. So if I do the search now, and I see there are 7 potential William Davises. Now the name in question is William J. Davis or John Davis, and it's potentially, we have 3 here. If the student who'd asked me to do this knew where John was living, the question was looking perhaps at had he moved to England in 1911 to follow his brother into the army, then we could perhaps look at the family members in 1901 here and see if any of those was the correct one. Obviously, I'm not going to do that at the moment because there are a few options. But if he was going to be in the 1911 census in England, then I could use Ancestry to check for that or find my past. So if I go back into William Davis in Ancestry, and this time we'll say his birth is in 1891, and he was born in Glasgow. Now, this location here isn't a birth location, it's where you're actually listed in the census. So, sorry, no, this particular area is where you were actually born. Later on, there's a chance to identify where you might have been living in the census. So this, unlike Scotland's people, this will pick up because they have indexed place of birth as well. So let's have a check on that. We'll just look in the search field again. And this is William John, who is going to be aged about 20 in the 1911 census. But already you would see here, we don't seem to have, there's lots and lots of William Davises in different parts of the world. And we could restrict that to looking at the English census. And how can I do that? Well, I can click here on Census and Electoral Rolls. I can then restrict it to a particular time, or I can just look down the right hand side as I have here, and I can see there are 1911 England census. Now there are a huge number listed here, and that certainly doesn't mean there are 16,000 William Davises, but there are 16,000 records which Ancestry deems might have something to do with your William John Davis. Now we don't see a William John Davis appearing necessarily. There's a John William, but he was born in Edinburgh, so I don't think he's the correct person. And looking down here, I don't see an immediate one jumping to mind that could be your William. So I think for that particular one, you would have to spend a bit of time looking through those results to see if we can find William in the 1911 census. Remember, the only place you're going to find the 1911 Scottish census is on Scotland's People. Ancestry and Find My Past don't have a subscription for that. So if I return to the Scotland's People and maybe up his age by 10 years and say this time we want to look in the 1911 census only in Scotland and undertake the search, we now have 10 matches, none of which are William John, notice. But again, if you know where the rest of the family were living, then perhaps you could have a look at some of these Glasgow locations and see if he actually is listed there. And let's stick with the 1911 census to look for our next person. And that is a Janet McPhail, who was married a couple of times. And by 1911, which I've been asked to look at, it's likely that she was listed with her second husband's surname of Blackstock. She was known as Jessie, but obviously used the name Janet as well. And again, that's quite common. You do sometimes have to check a few potential surnames, or forenames rather, and there are often opportunities. You can have forename variants here, or you could stick with a forename beginning with J, with a female, but well, let's just leave that just now. And we think that Janet or Jessie was living in Glasgow or Dumbarton. So again, if I click the search there, and we found 8 matches this time. And there are a number of Janets. Now it's, Jessies. Jessie was born about 1848. Now we didn't include that search term in Scotland's People, but were we to do so, we would expect that Jessie is aged about 63. And as you can see, there is a 63-year-old Jessie in Glasgow. I'm going to click on that. I have already looked at it, which is why it was showing as paid. And if I click that one, you can see, as we looked in the video, there is a large image appears, and we've got to now look at this and see if we can find Jessie. And here we have someone living in Water Street, 48 Water Street in Glasgow. And we have an Isaac Little, who's 22, with his wife Bella, also aged 22, and 2 young children. But we have his father-in-law, in other words, Bella's father, or perhaps her mother. It's not quite clear who this might be, because here's Jessie Blackstock, and this looks like she's married to James Blackstock. They've been married for 40 years, which would suggest from this that you've got Jessie married in 1871. Whether that's your correct person or not, I need you to tell me that, of course. And that they've had 7 children, of whom only 2 are still living, which is quite sad to note that one. So potentially Bella could be one of these children. She's 22, and it's possible that this is a daughter of Jessie and James Blackstock. However, we don't know that we've definitely got the correct person here. Going across, you can see there's no occupation given for Jessie. Her husband is unemployed, and both of them were born in Glasgow. In fact, James was born in Govan and Jessie's born in Glasgow. So potentially we have found her. Looking in the 1911 census, this is the only place you could look. You certainly couldn't look for this woman in the 1911 census in Ancestry or Find My Past, because they don't have the records. Only Scotland's People does. And finally, we were asked to look for Henry Miller, born in 1880 in Coat Hill, which I believe is probably in the area of Coatbridge, or I'm assuming it may well be. So again, if I want to go and search here, I'll click Search All Records. Now you'll notice I'm not choosing to search the census records solely, and there's a particular reason for that. If I search the census records, it will ask me to search on a particular year of the census, and sometimes it's useful to have an opportunity to go back and look and see if there are records for this person in other census records in other years. So again, I'm not going to put his middle name, which is quite a distinctive middle name. I am this time going to choose a variant of the surname, because Miller, as you'll be aware, could be spelled in a variety of ways. And Henry was born in about 1880 in Coat Hill, so we're going to see if we can narrow this down a little bit. So let's have a look for Henry in the 1881 census, where we would expect that he is a few months old, since he was born in December 1880, and the 1881 census was taken early in the year. So let's have a look for the 1881 census. Now again, you can see there's no way there's 159 absolutely Henry Millers, although as it is a fairly common name, you'll see immediately there are some spelling variations here. Now if I want to restrict that to say I'm only looking for someone who was born in Lanarkshire, that would help me to refine this. So I can click on Refine Search, and I can put a birthplace of Lanarkshire. Obviously we don't have an occupation because he's just going to be a few months old. And let's see how many Henry Millers we have. So we have Henry Mick Miller in Bothwell, Henry B. Miller in Old Monkland, Henry Miller. Now this one looks likely because the fact that he's age 0 means he's not yet 1 year old. So let's have a click on that one. And here we have Henry, who's a grandson. So potentially what we have here is a situation where Henry's parents have died and he's living with his grandparents, or grandfather it would appear to be, grandmother, Margaret Mintus, who's a widow, with her son William Frew, and her daughter Margaret, who would appear, I think, to be Henry's mother. However, she's not listed as a widow. She's married, so potentially what we have here, rather than the parents being dead, is that Henry's father may be working elsewhere on the day of the census. So this looks quite likely for him. Old Monkland, I would think, is probably a likely location, but just let's go back and look for him in the following census. So let's look for Henry in the 1891 census, and I'm just going to go in here again. Miller. Now, like what we did, I'll have surname variants shown, and I'll put in Henry. And we think he's going to be this time somewhere between 9 and 10. And again, let's restrict that to Lanarkshire and see what we find. 2 records, none of which, however, are, oh, sorry, I was looking in the 1911 census, you see. It pays you to go back and check. Apologies for that. I didn't change that. I should have spotted it. 1891. Search again. And we have 6 matches. And where could we be looking here? Well, again, there's 2 possibilities. Because his middle name doesn't begin with an E, I don't think that's probably him. However, this may well be him, Henry, aged 10. And remember, when we looked on Find My Past, his mother's name was Margaret. Let's see if that coincides with what we find here. I'll just enlarge it so you can see it better. And here we have a William Miller, married to Maggie, so that does look quite likely. And I think we had George, who was living with Henry in 1881 as well. So this certainly does appear to me to be the right family, and they're living in 23 Burnbank Crescent in, let's see, was that in Airdrie? In Coatbridge, where William Miller, his father, is employed as a general labourer. And remember, we talked about the fact you could tell the house it's a very small house, only 1 room, and they're living there with 4 children. So I hope that gives you a flavour of how to use each of these sites, and as we mentioned in the original handout, there are more than these sites that you can look at, but I hope that gives you an indication. And please, if I have looked for your ancestor and it is the right person and you're delighted that we found that, please let me know. Okay, so good hunting. I hope you find some more people this week, and we'll see you on the forums. Bye for now.